My name is Georgia, and I am 58 years old. Never in my life did I imagine that my own children would lock me in my bedroom on Christmas Day. The pain of hearing them whisper, "She is just a dramatic old lady," cut deeper than any physical pain I had ever experienced. These were the children I had raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for. How did we get here? What happened to the family I thought we were? If you are watching this from somewhere in your home, please take a moment to like and subscribe before I share this heartbreaking story that changed my life forever. I was a widow for 10 years before the incident happened. My husband Thomas passed away from heart disease, leaving me to raise our 3 children alone. We had been high school sweethearts married for 28 years, building what I thought was the perfect family. His death left a void in our lives that I tried desperately to fill by keeping our family traditions alive. Amelia is my oldest at 35. She always was the achiever of the family, determined and focused from a young age. She excelled in school, went on to law school, and now works at a prestigious firm in the city. She has 2 children of her own. My grandchildren, William and Harper, ages 7 and 5. Her husband Daniel is also a lawyer, and they live in what I can only describe as a picture-perfect home in an upscale neighborhood. Amelia inherited her father's sharp mind and analytical thinking, but somewhere along the way, she also developed a coldness that Thomas never had. Jonathan, my middle child, is 32 and works as an investment fund manager. He was always my sensitive boy, growing up the one who would bring home injured birds and nurse them back to health. I still remember how he cried when his father died, clinging to me at the funeral. But as he grew older, that sensitivity seemed to harden into ambition. He married his college girlfriend Laura 4 years ago. They don't have children yet, always saying they're too focused on their careers. Jonathan calls less and less these days, and when he does, our conversations feel scripted and distant. My youngest, Stephanie, is 28 and works in marketing for a cosmetics company. She was always caught between wanting to please her older siblings and finding her own path. Being 10 years younger than Amelia meant she often looked up to her sister with admiration that sometimes bordered on worship. Stephanie is single, living in an apartment downtown, and is usually the one who calls me the most, though even those calls have grown less frequent over the years. When the children were young, our home was filled with laughter and warmth. We went camping every summer in the mountains, spending nights under the stars, telling stories around the campfire. Thomas would play his guitar while I led the children in singing songs. We had Sunday dinners without fail, and our Christmas celebrations were legendary among our friends and extended family. We had traditions, matching pajamas on Christmas Eve, Thomas reading The Night Before Christmas, the children placing the star on top of the tree together. After Thomas died, I tried desperately to maintain that sense of family. I continued our traditions as best I could, though they felt hollow without him there. I would put on a brave face and push through my grief, because I knew my children needed stability during such a difficult time. I remember one Christmas, our first without Thomas, when I stayed up all night baking his famous cinnamon rolls, because I couldn't bear the thought of Christmas morning without them. I put my own grief aside to focus on my children. I had been working part-time as a librarian before Thomas died, but I took on more hours to make ends meet. I rearranged my schedule to be home. When the children needed me, helped with homework, attended every school event and sports game. I used the life insurance money to help pay for their college education, rather than securing my own future. Every decision I made was with them in mind. As they grew older and more successful in their careers, I noticed a shift in their attitudes toward me. Initially, it was subtle. Shortened phone calls, cancelled visits, impatience when I shared stories about my day. I chalked it up to them being busy with their own lives. After all, isn't that what we raise our children to do? To go out into the world and create lives of their own? But there was something else brewing beneath the surface. Something I wouldn't fully understand until that fateful Christmas day. 2 years ago, after months of unexplained pain, extreme fatigue, and what I can only describe as a mental fog, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. The diagnosis came after countless doctor visits, tests, and specialists who initially dismissed my symptoms as age-related or psychosomatic. Dr. Natalie Turner was the first doctor who truly listened to me. She was a rheumatologist with kind eyes and a gentle manner who took the time to hear my full medical history. When she finally gave my condition a name, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief that I wasn't imagining the pain, that there was a medical explanation for what I was experiencing. Dread, because I knew fibromyalgia was a chronic condition with no cure. "The pain you're experiencing is real, Georgia," Dr. Turner assured me during that appointment. "Fibromyalgia affects the way your brain processes pain signals, making you more sensitive to pain. But with proper management, many patients lead full lives." I left her office with pamphlets, prescriptions, and a treatment plan that included medication, physical therapy, and lifestyle changes. I felt hopeful for the first time in months. Finally, I had answers and a path forward. My hope quickly faded when I shared the diagnosis with my children. Their reactions were not what I had expected or needed. Amelia's response was immediate skepticism. "Fibromyalgia? Isn't that just a catch-all diagnosis when they can't figure out what's really wrong?" she said over the phone. I could hear her typing in the background, no doubt researching while we spoke. "I just read that many doctors don't even believe it's a real condition. It says here it's often psychological." Within days, she began sending me articles about psychosomatic illnesses and the power of positive thinking. Each link felt like an accusation, a suggestion that my pain wasn't real, but rather a manifestation of loneliness or depression. She recommended a therapist rather than wasting money on treatments for a condition that might not even exist. Jonathan's approach was different, but equally dismissive. He simply avoided the subject altogether. Whenever I mentioned my symptoms or treatment, he would quickly change the topic to something more pleasant, as though my illness was an uncomfortable subject, best not discussed in polite conversation. "So how about those Seahawks this season?" he would interject after I mentioned a particularly bad pain day. Or, "Did I tell you about the new project I'm working on?" It was clear he didn't want to engage with my reality, preferring to keep our relationship surface level and free from the messiness of chronic illness. Stephanie's reaction was the most complex. She seemed to vacillate between belief and doubt, often influenced by her older siblings' perspectives. One day, she would call to ask how my physical therapy was going, and the next, she would suggest that perhaps Amelia was right, that I should focus more on my mental health. "I'm just worried about you, Mum," she would say. "Sometimes when people live alone, they can become fixated on health problems. Maybe you just need to get out more, join a book club or something." The worst moment came when I had to miss my granddaughter Harper's kindergarten graduation. The ceremony fell on a day when my symptoms were flaring so badly I could barely get out of bed. The pain in my joints felt like ground glass, and the fatigue was so overwhelming that even lifting my phone to call Amelia required tremendous effort. "I'm so sorry," I said through tears. "I was looking forward to being there, but I just can't make it today." The silence on Amelia's end spoke volumes before she finally responded. "Harper will be disappointed. She made a special card for you." Her tone was measured, but laced with judgment. "This is becoming a pattern, Mum." That night, Stephanie called me, her voice thick with emotion. "Amelia says you're choosing to isolate yourself, that you're using your condition as an excuse." I could tell she was torn between loyalty to her sister and concern for me. "Is there anything I can do to help you feel better, so you can be more present in our lives?" Her question, though asked with good intentions, stung. It suggested that my absence was a choice, that if I just tried harder, I could overcome the limitations of my condition. It revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what I was going through, and I felt more alone than ever. As time went on, I found myself sharing less and less about my health struggles. What was the point when my pain was met with doubt, my struggles with avoidance? I began to present a filtered version of my life to my children, one where the pain was minimized and my capabilities exaggerated. It was easier than facing their disbelief or disappointment. But this pretense came at a cost. It deepened my isolation and prevented me from getting the support I desperately needed. Over time, the skepticism from my children evolved into something more insidious. They began to ignore clear signs that I needed help, dismissing my requests as attention-seeking behavior rather than genuine need. One rainy Tuesday, I texted Amelia about a severe pain flare-up that had left me unable to drive to the pharmacy for my medication. I asked if she could possibly pick up my prescription during her lunch break, as her office was only 10 minutes from my home. Hours passed without a response. When she finally replied late that evening, she said simply, "Sorry, just seeing this. Can you ask a neighbor?" The message was clear. Her time was too valuable to be spent on what she perceived as an unnecessary errand. I ended up calling a delivery service and paying an extra $20 as I could hardly afford to get my medication. Jonathan's dismissal was more direct. During a lunch we had planned weeks in advance, I mentioned that my doctor had suggested swimming as therapy for my condition. "There's a membership at the community center, but it's a bit out of my budget right now," I explained, hoping he might offer to help since I knew he had recently received a substantial bonus at work. He stirred his coffee methodically before responding. "Mom, don't you think you're becoming a bit too focused on this fibromyalgia thing? It seems like it's all you talk about lately." I sat there stunned by his characterization of my chronic pain as this fibromyalgia thing, as though it were a hobby I had taken up rather than a debilitating condition. The conversation moved on, but something shifted in me that day. I realized my son saw my illness as an inconvenience to him, a tedious subject that interrupted more pleasant conversation. Stephanie's avoidance was perhaps the most painful because it came wrapped in excuses that sounded reasonable on the surface. When I asked if she could drive me to an important doctor's appointment, she said she was swamped at work and suggested I use a rideshare service instead. This from the daughter who found time to attend weekend brunches with friends and post about them on social media. The message was clear. Certain things were worth making time for, and I wasn't one of them. Family gatherings became increasingly tense as I struggled to navigate their disbelief. During a Sunday dinner at Amelia's home, I overheard her whispering to Jonathan in the kitchen while I sat in the living room with my grandchildren. "She says she can't babysit anymore because of her condition," Amelia said, the air quotes audible in her tone. "But she seems fine when it's something she wants to do." Jonathan's response was equally dismissive. Classic mum, always needing to be at the center of attention since Dad died. They didn't realize I could hear them. Didn't know that their words sliced through me like physical blows. I sat there playing with Harper and William, forcing a smile while fighting back tears. The culmination of their dismissal came during what they called a family meeting, but what felt more like an intervention. They sat me down in my own living room expressions, serious as though they were about to address an addiction or dangerous behavior. "Mum, we're concerned." Amelia began clearly, the appointed spokesperson. "We think you might benefit from seeing a psychiatrist. This preoccupation with physical symptoms might be masking depression or anxiety." Jonathan nodded in agreement. "We've noticed you've become more isolated, more focused on your health issues. It's not healthy, Mum." Stephanie, sitting slightly apart, added softly, "We just want you to be happy and active again. Their words were reasonable on the surface, their concern seemingly genuine. But underneath was the clear implication they didn't believe my pain was real. They thought I was exaggerating or imagining my symptoms. They had diagnosed me with attention-seeking behavior rather than acknowledging the actual diagnosis from medical professionals. I felt gaslighted, made to question my own experiences and perceptions. Was I exaggerating? Was the pain not as bad as I thought? Should I just push through it as they seemed to expect? These questions plagued me, adding psychological distress to my physical pain. The worst example of their dismissal came when Amelia visited with her family. I was having a particularly bad day, barely able to get out of bed. I heard her in the hallway outside my bedroom, speaking to her daughter in a stage whisper that was clearly meant for me to hear. "Grandma isn't feeling well again. But don't worry, we'll still have fun today." Then her son William asked innocently, "Is Grandma really sick?" Amelia's response sent a chill through me. Grandma thinks she's sick. Sometimes grown-ups pretend to be sick when they're feeling sad or lonely. The implication that I was faking illness to manipulate my family was devastating. It was also teaching my grandchildren to doubt me, to see their grandmother as someone who lied for attention, rather than a person struggling with a legitimate medical condition. After that visit, I stopped sharing altogether. I smiled through the pain when they visited, declined invitation when I knew I couldn't manage, but invented excuses other than my health. I became an actress in my own life, performing wellness for an audience that refused to acknowledge my suffering. The isolation grew deeper, the gulf between us wider, all while I longed for nothing more than their understanding and support. As November turned to December, my thoughts turned to Christmas, as they always did. Despite everything, I held on to hope that the holiday season might bridge the growing divide between my children and me. Christmas had always been special in our family, a time when we came together regardless of what was happening in our individual lives. In years past, our home would be transformed into a winter wonderland. Thomas and I would spend an entire weekend decorating hanging lights along the eaves, setting up the nativity scene he had hand-carved, and finding the perfect tree that would reach our vaulted ceiling. The children would help decorate the tree with ornaments collected over the years, each with its own story and significance. I would bake for weeks before Christmas, cookies, pies, breads, and Thomas's favorite cinnamon rolls that filled the house with the scent of spices and sugar. We would play Christmas music constantly, and in the evenings we would sip hot chocolate while watching holiday movies together. These memories sustained me as I tentatively brought up the idea of hosting Christmas at my home during a phone call with Stephanie. "I was thinking we could all gather here for Christmas like we used to," I said, trying to keep my voice casual to hide how much it mattered to me. "I know it's been a few years since we've done that." There was a pause before Stephanie responded. "Oh, I'm not sure, Mum. Amelia was talking about doing something at her house this year since she has more space." This was news to me. She hasn't mentioned anything to me about that. "Well, it's not definite or anything," Stephanie backpedaled. "Maybe you should talk to her about it." Taking her advice, I called Amelia the next day. The conversation quickly became heated. "Mum, it's just easier at my house," she insisted. "There's more room for the kids to play, and frankly, your house isn't exactly child-proof anymore." "My house is the same as it's always been," I argued. "And Christmas has always been here. It's tradition." "Traditions change, Mum. We can't keep doing things the same way forever, just because that's how they've always been done." Her words felt like a rejection, not just of my home, but of everything I had tried to preserve since Thomas died. "This is important to me, Amelia. I want to host Christmas this year." A heavy sigh came through the phone. "Is this about your condition? Because if you're not feeling up to traveling, we understand. But that's even more reason not to put yourself through the stress of hosting." The way she said "your condition" with that slight emphasis that conveyed her lingering doubt, made my resolve strengthen. This isn't about fibromyalgia. It's about family, about maintaining connections that seem to be slipping away. The conversation ended with Amelia reluctantly agreeing to discuss it with her siblings, which felt like a small victory. Jonathan's response came via text, rather than a call. Amelia mentioned Christmas at your place, just FYI. Laura and I were thinking of renting a cabin in the mountains this year. More room for everyone, and no one has to clean up. Think about it. His suggestion felt like yet another attempt to sideline me to move our family celebrations away from the home I had made for them. I replied simply, Christmas has always been at home. I hope you'll be here. Stephanie, ever the mediator, called a few days later. I think it would be nice to have Christmas at your house, Mum, she said, and for a moment my heart lifted. But Amelia and Jonathan seem pretty set on doing something different this year. And what do you think, Stephanie? Not what your brother and sister think, but you. She hesitated, and in that pause I heard her struggle between pleasing her siblings and supporting me. I think traditions matter, but I also understand why they might want to change. In the end, after multiple tense conversations and what I suspected were discussions among the three of them that excluded me, they agreed to come to my home for Christmas. But their agreement felt grudging, their enthusiasm non-existent. It wasn't the joyful acceptance I had hoped for, but I told myself it was enough that they would be here. Despite the pain in my joints that made every movement an exercise in endurance, I threw myself into preparations. I decorated as best I could, though not as extensively as in years past. I planned a menu of traditional favorites: turkey with all the trimmings, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce made from scratch, as Thomas had taught me, and his famous cinnamon rolls for Christmas morning. Shopping exhausted me, and I had to break the cooking into small sessions, spread over days, rather than the marathon baking sessions of the past. But I persevered, driven by the hope that the familiar sights, smells, and tastes of Christmas would somehow bridge the gulf between us, would remind my children of the family we had been and could be again. As Christmas approached, I found myself both eagerly anticipating and dreading the holiday. I wanted so desperately for it to be perfect, for us to reconnect in the way we once had. But beneath that hope was the fear that even Christmas magic couldn't fix what had been broken between us. Still, I clung to hope as I wrapped presents, addressed cards, and prepared my home to welcome my family. Perhaps I thought the spirit of the season would open their hearts to understanding. Perhaps this Christmas would be a new beginning for us all. Christmas Day dawned cold and clear, with a light dusting of snow that made everything look like a scene from a greeting card. I awoke early, my body stiff and aching, but my spirit determined. Today would be different, I told myself. Today would be about family and love and understanding. The first to arrive were Amelia Daniel and the children precisely at noon as planned. William and Harper rushed to hug me, their excitement infectious. For a moment, seeing their joy at the decorated tree and the presents beneath it, I felt a surge of the Christmas spirit I remembered from years past. But that feeling faded as Amelia inspected the living room with a critical eye. "Mom, these decorations are a fire hazard," she said, adjusting a garland that hung near a lamp. "And is that tree stand secure? The last thing we need is for it to fall over with the kids running around." Daniel offered a tight smile and a brief hug before becoming absorbed in his phone, clearly uncomfortable with the underlying tension. Jonathan and Laura arrived 30 minutes late, bringing a store-bought pie and apologizing for the delay. "Traffic was a nightmare," Jonathan explained, though I knew they lived only 20 minutes away. Laura immediately gravitated toward Amelia, the two of them falling into easy conversation about a fitness class they both attended while Jonathan poured himself a generous glass of wine. Stephanie arrived last alone and flustered. Sorry, couldn't find parking, she said, though there was plenty of space on my quiet street. She too seemed eager to join Amelia and Laura's conversation, rather than help me in the kitchen. As I worked to finalize the meal, moving slower than usual, due to the pain in my hands and back, I overheard snippets of conversation from the living room. The place looks a bit run down, doesn't it? Amelia whispered, not quite quietly enough. She can't keep up with it anymore, Jonathan replied. It's too much house for one person. Their words stung, but I continued my preparations, determined not to let their criticism ruin the day. When I finally called everyone to the table, the turkey slightly overcooked due to my distractions. I was met with polite but muted enthusiasm. Dinner was a stilted affair. Conversation remained superficial with long stretches of awkward silence, broken only by requests to pass dishes or comments about the food. When I mentioned my new medication was helping with my symptoms, Amelia quickly changed the subject to William's school performance. After the meal, as the children played with their new toys and the adults gathered in the living room with coffee and dessert, I excused myself to fetch a family photo album I wanted to share. Passing the kitchen, I overheard Jonathan and Amelia in what they thought was a private conversation. We need to talk about Mum, Amelia said, her voice low but intense. She can't continue living alone like this. Did you see how she struggled to carry the turkey? What are you suggesting? Jonathan asked. A retirement community. Maybe. Or she could move in with one of us. Though honestly, I don't have the space or patience for a live-in mother who needs constant attention. Especially when half her problems are probably in her head, Jonathan added. Ever since Dad died, she's been looking for ways to keep us tied to her. This condition is just the latest. Their words hit me like physical blows. Is that truly what they thought of me? That I was inventing pain to manipulate them? That I was so desperate for attention that I would create an elaborate fiction about my health? I must have made a noise because they both turned to see me standing in the doorway. The photo album clutched to my chest like a shield. The look of guilt on Jonathan's face quickly morphed into defiance, while Amelia had the grace to appear embarrassed. Mum, we were just concerned about you, she began, but I cut her off. No, you were talking about me as though I'm a problem to be solved rather than your mother. My voice shook with emotion. You've never once asked what it's like to live with constant pain. You've never offered to help or even tried to understand. Instead, you whisper behind my back and treat me like I'm a burden or a liar. The commotion drew Stephanie and the others from the living room. What's going on? Stephanie asked, looking between us with confusion. Apparently, I'm making up my medical condition for attention, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. At least according to my caring children. Mum, you're overreacting, Jonathan said dismissively. This is exactly what we're talking about. Everything becomes a drama with you. A drama? I repeated, incredulous. Is that what you think chronic pain is? A performance for your benefit? Stephanie stepped forward, attempting to mediate as always. Let's all calm down. It's Christmas, remember? Yes, it's Christmas. I agreed. A time when families are supposed to support each other, not question each other's reality. Amelia's expression hardened. Mum, you're ruining the holiday with this negative attitude. The kids are in the next room, for God's sake. The injustice of her accusation was too much. I had spent weeks preparing for this day, despite my pain had cooked and cleaned and decorated to create a perfect Christmas for them. And now I was being told that expressing hurt at their dismissal was ruining the holiday. I need some time alone, I said, finally feeling the beginning of tears and not wanting to cry in front of them. Please excuse me. I retreated to my bedroom upstairs, the photo album still clutched in my hands. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I allowed the tears to fall freely. How had it come to this? How had the children I raised with love and sacrifice become so cold, so dismissive of my pain? After some time, I dried my tears and decided to rejoin the gathering. These were still my children, still my family, and it was still Christmas. Perhaps we could salvage the day. But when I tried to open my bedroom door, it wouldn't budge. I turned the handle again, thinking it must be stuck, but it remained firmly closed. With growing alarm, I realized the truth. The door had been locked from the outside. "Hello?" I called, knocking on the door. "The door seems to be stuck. Can someone help me?" There was silence. Then the sound of hushed voices in the hallway. I pressed my ear to the door and heard Amelia's whispered words that would forever change my relationship with my children. "Just leave her. She is just a dramatic old lady. She needs time to calm down and stop making everything about her." Jonathan's voice followed. "Agreed. Let's go back downstairs and enjoy the rest of Christmas. She can come down when she's ready to act like an adult." I stood frozen, unable to believe what I was hearing. My own children had deliberately locked me in my bedroom on Christmas Day, dismissing my legitimate hurt as drama and attention-seeking. In that moment, something broke inside me. The last thread of hope, that they would eventually understand, that we would find our way back to the loving family we had once been. The reality of my situation settled over me like a physical weight. I was locked in my bedroom by my own children, who had dismissed my feelings and my very real medical condition as nothing more than dramatic behavior from an attention-seeking old woman. The betrayal cut deeper than any pain my fibromyalgia had ever caused. I moved away from the door, my legs weak beneath me, and sat heavily on the edge of my bed. A storm of emotions raged within me: shock, hurt, anger, and beneath it all a profound sense of loss. These were my children, the people I had carried, birthed, and raised with all the love and care I possessed. How could they treat me this way? For a few minutes I simply sat there, tears streaming down my face. But then gradually another emotion began to surface through the hurt indignation. No, this was not acceptable. I would not be treated like a misbehaving child in my own home. With shaking hands, I reached for my cell phone on the nightstand and dialed my neighbor, Martha Wilson. Martha and I weren't particularly close, but she was kind and reliable, always willing to collect my mail when I traveled or lend me a cup of sugar in a pinch. "Martha, it's Georgia from next door. I hate to bother you on Christmas, but I have a rather unusual situation." My voice wavered as I explained what had happened. There was a moment of stunned silence before Martha responded, "Georgia, that's terrible. I'll be right over." True to her word, Martha arrived at my house within minutes. I could hear her knocking on the front door, then muffled conversation as someone, probably Stephanie, answered. "I'm here to see Georgia." Martha's voice carried up the stairs. "She called me." More muffled conversation followed, then footsteps on the stairs. There was a brief, heated exchange in the hallway outside my room, words I couldn't quite make out. Then the sound of a key turning in the lock, and my door swung open to reveal Martha's concerned face, with Stephanie hovering anxiously behind her. "Georgia, are you all right?" Martha asked, stepping into the room. "I'm not hurt, just—" I struggled to find the words to describe the emotional devastation. "Just shocked." Martha turned to Stephanie, her expression stern. "Young lady, I can't believe you would do such a thing to your own mother. What were you thinking?" Stephanie had the grace to look ashamed. "It wasn't my idea. Amelia thought Mum needed some time alone to calm down. We were going to unlock it after a little while." "That's not for you to decide," Martha said firmly. "Your mother is a grown woman in her own home, not a child having a tantrum. She turned back to me, her voice softening. Come on, Georgia. Let's go downstairs and sort this out. With Martha's steadying hand on my arm, I walked down the stairs to confront my children. They were gathered in the living room, expressions ranging from defiant Amelia to uncomfortable Jonathan to tearful Stephanie. The grandchildren had been sent outside with Daniel and Laura to play in the light snow away from the family drama. Would someone like to explain why you locked your mother in her bedroom on Christmas Day? Martha asked, her voice steady but sharp with disapproval. Amelia stepped forward, chin raised. Mum was getting overly emotional and causing a scene in front of the children. We thought she needed some time to compose herself, so you locked her door like she's an unruly teenager. Martha's incredulity matched my own. You don't understand, Jonathan interjected. Mom has been like this for months, always making everything about her health issues demanding attention. Her health issues, Martha repeated. You mean her fibromyalgia, the chronic condition that causes her constant pain. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. We're not convinced that's a real diagnosis. Many doctors consider it a psychological condition. Martha's expression hardened. My sister has fibromyalgia. I've seen firsthand how debilitating it can be. It's very real, and it's shameful that you would dismiss your mother's suffering this way. A tense silence filled the room. I looked at my children, really looked at them, and for the first time I saw clearly how they viewed me not as the mother who had sacrificed for them, who had loved them unconditionally, but as an inconvenience, a burden, an embarrassment. I want you all to leave, I said quietly. Mum, don't be ridiculous. Amelia started, but I held up my hand to stop her. No. I've spent years trying to maintain our family connections, making excuses for your behavior, blaming myself for the distance between us. But I see now that respect has to be the foundation of any relationship, even between parent and child. And you have shown me today that you don't respect me, not as your mother, not as a person with a legitimate medical condition, not even as an adult with the right to express hurt feelings. Jonathan scoffed. This is exactly the kind of overreaction we're talking about. Is it an overreaction to expect basic decency from my own children? I asked. Is it an overreaction to want you to believe me when I tell you I'm in pain? Is it an overreaction to be hurt when I overhear you calling me a dramatic old lady who makes up health problems for attention? Stephanie began to cry in earnest now. Mum, I'm sorry. I should have stood up to them. I shouldn't have let them lock the door. But you didn't stand up to them, Stephanie. You went along with it, just as you've gone along with their dismissal of my condition all this time. I took a deep breath, finding a strength I didn't know I possessed. I love you all. You're my children, and nothing will ever change that. But I will not allow myself to be treated this way anymore. Not by anyone, and especially not by the people who should love and support me the most. I gestured toward the door. Please gather your things and leave. We can talk again when you're ready to acknowledge the reality of my condition and treat me with the respect I deserve. Amelia looked like she might argue further, but something in my expression must have stopped her. Without another word, she went to collect her children and husband. Jonathan followed suit, calling for Laura. Stephanie lingered, tears streaming down her face. Mom, please. It's Christmas. Yes, it is, I agreed. And this isn't how I wanted to spend it. But some things are more important than maintaining a pleasant facade for the holidays. Self-respect is one of them. As they gathered their coats and presents, as the grandchildren asked confused questions about why they were leaving so soon, I stood firm in my decision. It hurt. God, how it hurt to send them away on Christmas Day. But I knew with absolute clarity that it was necessary. Not just for this moment, but for our future relationship if we were to have one at all. After they had gone, Martha stayed with me for a while, making tea and sitting with me as I processed what had happened. As the shock began to wear off, I felt something unexpected emerging through the pain, a sense of clarity and purpose I hadn't experienced in years. I can't keep trying to be the mother they want at the expense of being the person I am. I told Martha as we sat in my living room, the Christmas tree lights twinkling incongruously in the background. No, you can't, she agreed simply. And you shouldn't have to. As darkness fell on that Christmas day, I made a silent promise to myself. From now on, I would live my life on my terms. I would honor my limitations without apology, celebrate my strengths without seeking validation, and never again allow anyone, even my beloved children, to make me question my own reality. 6 months after that life-changing Christmas day, my world looked remarkably different. The initial pain of the confrontation with my children had evolved into something unexpected, a sense of liberation and self-discovery. The first change I made was joining a support group for people with fibromyalgia. Dr. Turner had suggested it months earlier, but I had hesitated, feeling that seeking support outside my family somehow indicated a failure on my part. Now I understood that was exactly what I needed: connection with people who understood my experience without questioning its validity. At my first meeting, I met Susan, a retired teacher in her 60s, who had been living with fibromyalgia for 15 years. Her matter-of-fact approach to managing the condition was refreshing. Some days are better than others, she told me over coffee after the meeting. The trick is to make the most of the good days. Without pushing so hard, you create more bad ones. I also met Harold, a former construction worker who had developed fibromyalgia after an accident. Harold's perspective as one of the few men in the group was valuable, and his humor in the face of chronic pain was inspiring. When he described his adult children's initial skepticism giving way to understanding after they attended a support meeting with him, I felt a flicker of hope for my own family situation. My friendship with Martha Wilson deepened in unexpected ways. What had begun as a neighborly rescue on Christmas Day evolved into a genuine bond. We discovered shared interests in gardening and classic films, and began having weekly movie nights with healthy snacks that accommodated my dietary needs. I never would have thought getting locked in my bedroom would lead to finding my best friend. I joked to Martha one evening as we settled in to watch an old Audrey Hepburn film. "Silver linings, Georgia," she replied with a smile. "Sometimes they come in the strangest packages." Perhaps the most significant change came when I started a blog about living with fibromyalgia. It began as a suggestion from my therapist. Yes, I finally started therapy, though, not for the reasons Amelia had suggested. My therapist, Dr. Lewis, thought writing might be therapeutic for me, a way to process my experiences and connect with others facing similar challenges. What started as private journaling soon evolved into a public blog when Harold from my support group encouraged me to share my insights. "You have a way of explaining this that makes sense," he said. "You could help a lot of people who are where you were a year ago." And so, finding my way through FibroFog was born. I wrote about the physical challenges of the condition, but also about the emotional and social aspects, the disbelief from loved ones, the isolation, the grief for the active life I once had. To my surprise, the blog gained a modest but engaged following with comments and messages from others, expressing gratitude for putting their experiences into words. "Your post about family members who don't believe in fibromyalgia made me cry," one reader wrote. "For the first time, I don't feel crazy or alone in this struggle." My home underwent a transformation as well. I hired a handyman to help with repairs I had been putting off, and slowly began redecorating to reflect my own tastes, rather than preserving the home exactly as it had been when Thomas was alive. I painted the dining room a soft sage green that I had always loved, but Thomas had vetoed as too modern. I rearranged furniture to make navigation easier on my bad days and converted the rarely used formal living room into a cozy reading nook filled with the books I never seemed to have time for before. Even my approach to my condition changed. I became more proactive in my treatment, researching new therapies and advocating for myself with medical professionals. I learned to pace myself, to listen to my body's signals, instead of pushing through pain to meet others' expectations. I found gentle exercises that helped rather than exacerbated my symptoms, and developed a routine that honored both my limitations and my abilities. My relationship with my children remained complicated. Stephanie was the first to reach out, calling me 2 weeks after Christmas with a tearful apology. "I've been reading about fibromyalgia," she said. "I had no idea how serious it is. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you, Mum." Our reconciliation was slow and not without setbacks. We began with short phone calls, gradually building back trust. She started coming for Sunday dinners once a month, sometimes bringing information she had found about managing fibromyalgia, or small gifts she thought might help. A heating pad, compression gloves, a meditation app subscription. Jonathan's outreach came later and with less humility. His wife Laura called first, confessing that she had been uncomfortable with how I was treated at Christmas. "Jonathan is stubborn," she said, "but he misses you. He just doesn't know how to admit he was wrong." Eventually, Jonathan called our conversation awkward and stilted. "Laura thinks we should talk." He began hardly the heartfelt apology I had hoped for. But it was a start. Over the following months, our communications gradually increased, though we carefully avoided the subject of that Christmas day and my condition. It wasn't ideal, but it was progress. Amelia remained the most distant. Her pride and certainty made it difficult for her to acknowledge any error in judgment. Our contact was limited to brief text messages about the children until 3 months after Christmas, when she sent me a surprising message. "I saw your blog. You're a good writer." She had found my fibromyalgia blog, though she didn't say how. It wasn't much, but it was an acknowledgement of sorts. A tiny crack in the wall of her certainty. When the children did visit, I was clear about my boundaries. I would not pretend to be well when I wasn't. I would not apologize for my limitations or try to hide them. I would speak openly about my conditions when relevant, not to dominate conversation, but as a natural part of discussing my life. And most importantly, I would not tolerate dismissal or disbelief, even subtle forms. You can acknowledge my reality, even if you don't fully understand it. I told Jonathan during one tense conversation, "That's all I've ever asked." As the next Christmas approached, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable. A year earlier, I would not host the holiday gathering. Instead, I accepted an invitation from my support group to join a Christmas retreat at a lakeside cabin, specially designed for people with chronic conditions. There would be accessible activities, meals prepared with dietary restrictions in mind, and most importantly, the company of people who understood what I was going through without explanation or justification. When I informed my children of my plans, their reactions were mixed. Stephanie expressed happiness that I was expanding my social circle. Jonathan seemed relieved to be freed from the awkwardness of another family Christmas, so soon after the last disaster. Amelia surprisingly appeared almost hurt. "So you're not going to see your grandchildren on Christmas?" she asked during a rare phone call. "I suggested an early celebration the weekend before," I reminded her. "You said you were too busy with work events." The silence that followed suggested she was reconsidering her priorities. Whether that would translate into actual change remained to be seen. The truth was, I had learned perhaps the most valuable lesson of my life in the past year. My worth was not determined by my children's validation. My pain was real whether they acknowledged it or not. My needs were legitimate, whether they helped meet them or not. And my life could be full and meaningful, even if it looked nothing like the one I had envisioned. I had raised my children to be independent, to pursue their own paths and make their own choices. Now I was doing the same, finally giving myself the permission I had always granted them. As I packed for the Christmas retreat, I came across the photo album I had been carrying when I discovered my children's betrayal the previous Christmas. I sat on my bed and slowly turned the pages, looking at the images of our family through the years. Birthday parties, graduations, vacations, ordinary moments captured in time. I felt a deep sadness for what had been lost, but also a profound gratitude for what remained. The past could not be changed, but the future was still unwritten. Perhaps in time we would find a new way to be family, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation or expectation. And if we didn't, I would be okay. The woman who had emerged from that locked bedroom was stronger than she knew, more resilient than anyone had given her credit for. She had discovered that self-love was not selfish, but necessary, that boundaries were not walls, but healthy definitions of self, and that accepting help was not weakness, but wisdom. That woman was me, Georgia, 58 years old, living with fibromyalgia, and for the first time in a very long time, truly living for myself. If you have ever felt invalidated by loved ones, or struggled to be believed about your pain, physical or emotional, know that you are not alone. Your experience is real, your feelings matter, and you deserve to be heard. Has something in my story resonated with you? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found value in my journey, consider liking and subscribing to hear more stories of resilience and self-discovery. Remember, sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to love yourself first. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to honor your truth, whatever it may be.